Hello everyone. I'm going to cover today a number of things dealing with politics because I just want to sort of summarize in my mind what is going on. I'm going to talk a little bit about Europe and the United States and the collective West and where we are, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about China and also about Iran and this new um, axis of resistance that is emerging. And let's see if I can sort of put two and two together here. Um, First of all, with this new NATO conference and everything, my thoughts are when I was looking at them and listening to what they were saying, it brought to my mind that book by Thomas Mann, Death in Venice. You read that book? There was a film made of it in 1974, I believe. The main character is portrayed by Dick Bogart. It had to be him. I mean, he's a fantastic actor. And anyway, it's about this old man who, in his old age, finds himself attracted to this beautiful prepubescent boy, and he ends up actually trying to be younger so as to attract him, and he dyes his hair and he ends up putting rouge on his face and a bit of color on his lips, and thinking that he is becoming more attractive, this old man with lipstick, you know. Um, and it's actually rather sad. It's actually almost painful. It's pathetic. But he is the only one who doesn't realize the ridicule that he is making of himself, and it's rather sad. And this is how, in many cases, I'm concerned that this is how the, let's say, the West is beginning to look to me. Let's deal with France and the elections and so on first. So there you had this popular front made up on the left, the so-called left, made up of different groupings of different political parties. There was Mélenchon, which is supposed to be the old traditional left, together with Greens, together with just about everybody else, all together in order to prevent this one particular party, the National Rally of Marine Le Pen, from getting to power. All right, so Mélenchon, who's portrayed as a communist, an old-fashioned communist of, the old type. There he was, apparently I didn't see him, but I heard that there he was singing the international communist anthem, La Internationale and everything else. Okay. I don't buy it, you see. I don't think that Mélenchon is, I think he's a Freemason. So in that, this is what I have heard from sources who know about this. So it looks, I wouldn't be surprised if whether it is him, the Prime Minister, I doubt, or whether it is Glassman, no, whether they end up making a deal with Macron, which means that they are serving the same interest, and he would be serving the same interest that Macron is serving. Now, why this Le Pen. Why this odium towards Marine Le Pen? I understand the origins of the party that his father founded. I think I dealt with that. It was a truly sort of pro-fascist, Vichy type of political party, but she actually took the party over, and whoops, over the. Am I okay? Yeah, over the next few decades, she managed to turn it into a sort of right wing. It's not ultra right wing. It's a sort of, I don't know, in domestic policies is center right, I suppose. But the charge is always made that it is an ultra right party and so on. She had to bend over backwards in many cases. For example, at the beginning, she was against the European Union and she was against the Europe. Well, she changed all that and she managed to accept that and so on. But so she actually came to the center, whether we believe her, the French believe her or not, but it's certainly not in her program a ultra right-wing party. So why this thing about her party? And I'm beginning to think that even though she was saying all the right things and so on, she made one mistake, and that was to talk about the the debt and the financing of the debt and the need to review that external debt. As with so many countries in Europe, the ratio to the GDP is extremely high, 100, 120, whatever it is. And that is what I think made the difference, because in international, transnational finance, those who own the world, the financing and debt and money is not to be touched. Can talk about other things, but when it comes to money, um, you cannot put up a fight against that. Remember the words of, was it Rothschild or Rockefeller, one of them, who said that give me the power to manage the currency, and then you can to the politicians, and then you can go on and enact as many laws as you want. If you hold the purse, you govern the country. So I don't think that obviously she has won, but I don't think this alliance in the so-called left is it's going to change very much in France at all. Okay, let me move on to, well, actually in this election thing, look what happened here in Britain. And one of the first things that Keir Starmer said was, Israel and Ukraine. Those are the most important things. So nothing is going to change here either. Now, let me move on a little bit to more general geopolitics, because we hear continuously now more and more two words, panic and chaos. The West is in a panic and, chaos. Okay. Is it true that the leaders of the West, meaning international, transnational finance, yeah, those who own the world, are in a panic or not? We know that whatever decisions they make through their politicians in all the different countries, those decisions are always made according to their own interests. not according to the well-being of the country concerned or of its citizens. They always follow their own interests. And they will go on and they will double down, even when they're not sure that they can win, even if they're not sure of victory at the end. But for them, if there is a 60%, 50%, 30%, zero chance even of victory in some way or another, they will go forward. In the case of the collective West, I don't think it's a question so much of East and West necessarily. I think we all have something in common, East and West and Middle East and everywhere else. And that is that citizens for this financial empire are not important. That we are not important to the elite. We don't necessarily count in their decision making. And since they own or control or direct our politicians, as I said, they're always going to take decisions and make those decisions according solely to their interests. And if they feel that those interests are threatened, as they are now, economically, politically, even personally, and those interests would invite a certain losing of control for them. If they feel that they are losing that control and that the world is moving to a different place, to a multipolar world, that creates a situation in which they have to react, that situation of panic, and they are going to react. They're ready and willing and able for anything in order to protect those interests, even more. Never the citizens of those countries concerned. This country, that doesn't matter. Their own interests, using us, the people, as usual, to carry the burden, to carry their weight. Remember Bertolt Brecht, who said that the people usually, they never share in their fortunes, but we are called always to share in their misfortunes. Yeah. It is as if they promise us a few crumbs, as it were, as if we are carrying the whole weight for them, and we take them all the way to that door, to that banquet, with the promise that we might share in something. And as soon as we get there to the door is slammed on our faces. And we are left outside, looking in, like your peasant or your coachman in the 19th century. There you were waiting outside. And right now, obviously, they're willing to do anything to prevent Russia from, as we know, from winning this war. I think most people see that Russia is winning the war. At least most commentators that I listen to see it this way, and they give their reasons. But they have the PR to convince us all that this geopolitical advance of developing countries, emerging countries into this new world, a multipolar world, they are not going to allow this. This is, I think that this is what the war now is about. It's no longer about Ukraine. We have known this for a long time, haven't we? And it's not even a war just Russia versus NATO, NATO versus Russia. I think the war now is trying to prevent or make it as difficult as possible for this new world that is developing, this new world that is emerging, this multipolar world, actually, preventing them from doing so or from being successful at it. Let me give you two examples about, for example, Iran and China. What was always different about Iran, as I saw it in geopolitics, is that it was this one country that, as opposed to the other monarchies in the Middle East and the other Muslim countries, it was this one country where seemed to be taking always, let us say, the populist stand, okay, the side of the population fighting the powerful kind of thing. It was always on the side of the Palestinians, really, when all the other Arab countries were just very happy to ignore them. Now, Iran has a population of 80 million people, but it was always very eager to fight this hegemony by the United States. But now, it was there for a long time by itself, but now with Russia and China, they have created this, they call it the axis of resistance. And it has been, and it is, and I think it will continue to be an essential anti-hegemonist, anti-USA power. And obviously, therefore, one against the expansion of the strategies, the expansionist strategies of Israel. Now, these countries in the Near East or the Middle East seem to be actually now finding common ground very slowly, but finding some sort of common ground despite their differences. Individually, these other countries could not actually confront the power of the US. And the US, for its part, always made sure that they remained, separated, distance their interests from one another. But now with this axis of resistance, Russia, China, Iran, they find it is possible actually to challenge it if these three other countries, have their back. So now we find the Saudis, for example, even Egypt. There are a lot of elements here converging. One is this new axis of resistance, so-called. The other one is the perceived real weakness of the United States, which in many cases is becoming visible and, almost evident for everyone to see. The issue of Yemen, for example, the petrodollar. Now the Saudis, the agreement had expired, and the Saudis refused to renew it. They're going in a different direction. And also the BRICS and all these countries that are applying to become members of the BRICS. Now that they have a certain power there behind them, they're all queuing to join. I think there are a lot of countries are totally fed up with what happened to them. You know that the international financial organizations, the World Bank and the IMF and so on, they would basically tell them what to do, otherwise they wouldn't have financing. And now they see another possibility, and they're all queuing up to go into. So this is the enemy, I believe, for the collective West now. Is not no longer a question of Ukraine. It's just is this new world developing that they have to fight. So this. So what I mean is that there is this thing going on in the so-called global South, but here in the West too, we are beginning to see perhaps quite a lot of dissatisfaction. And this is the problem. They have already lost, I'm talking about the West Empire. They have already lost this part of the world, and now they cannot afford to even lose the consent or the apathy of the West. Otherwise, they would lose it all. So, in this this anti-corporativist or anti-hegemonist or anti-US or anti-West and its allies that we see in the rest of the world is stronger every day. And it is not accidental. We in the West see how we are ruled by leaders who do not have the interests of the nation or the interest of the people really as their main concern, but they do obey actually the interests of corporations in terms of economics certainly, and the interests of the intelligence agencies for cultural and social political issues. And Russia and China were perhaps the first to rebel against these corporate dominance. I think Putin started basically his reforms in the 2000s. If you remember, I don't have a lot of great detail about this, but after the collapse of the Soviet Union, you know that the West was there and the oligarchs sort of just taking the companies and corporations and stealing just everything that used to belong to the state. Yeah. And when Putin came in, he started thwarting this, but he did it very, very gradually. He didn't just go off and start against the oligarchs and so on. They were too powerful. One of them, in a recent interview, actually, I forget the name because the Russian names, but it was an oligarch who owned, I think it was a gas company or a petrol company. Anyway, he said that they were actually, I think I mentioned this, that they were actually coordinated everything by the Rothschild family. So we're talking about the West financing, yeah. So he had to go about it gradually and carefully, but I think for the most part he has, perhaps not totally, but to a great extent, succeeded. And this, if Putin could get rid of the oligarchs and their political power at any rate, could it be done here in the West? That is the worrying thing for them. But okay, so Putin from the 2000 really, 2000s. Then China in 2012 changed also with the arrival of Xi Jinping. who actually took a very um, clear approach against being in the hands, China being in the hands of these corporatist financial elite in the West. Iran had always been sort of from 1979 kind of anti-US, anti-corporation. So the three of them certainly agree on fighting on the West on this point. So I had a few things written down here about Israel, but I think I'll do that in some other time. So in any case, the Middle East is actually divided less and less by being able to join and being confident and secure enough to join this axis of resistance. The country is not in decline because it has problems. The country is in decline because it cannot face those problems. It doesn't want to confront those problems. And if you can face them and confront them, say the war in Ukraine is not going well for whatever it might be, then you can do something about it, can't you? Then you can say, well, this is not going well, so we need to do something else, or we need to change direction, so whatever it is. But when you are not willing to even see that you have a problem, I think that's when you absolutely go down as an individual. We talk a little bit about China. It's not that I know all that much, but I think that what I do know, the little that I know is correct. I remember supervising a thesis about, this was pre-COVID, actually, obviously pre-Ukraine war, because the Ukraine war, all of a sudden, when it started, COVID disappeared. That's a problem. It's one of the things that the war did. But I'm going to take you back, because I do remember it, to the 1970s. After the Cultural Revolution and all that finished in the 70s, the Chinese, they were called chairman at that time, and the president of China, his name was Deng Xiaoping. He came over to the West, and he went to the United States, and he had realized, the Chinese Communist Party had realized that the way the economy was going up till that time wasn't working. They were following more or less the same, although they were not terribly good friends with Russia, with the Soviet Union, they were more or less doing that, and that didn't work. So they did want a little bit of that lovely capitalism that originates, production and profits and so on, and investment. And okay, so he came to the United States, and I think the United States thought that they were playing China in order to keep them apart, China and the Soviet Union. But looking back, if you look at a lot of details, I think it was China who was using the United States, playing them a little bit better than the other way around. Anyway, I remember Deng Xiaoping. Some of you of my age, you might remember when he came to the United States, and he was in Texas, and he put on a Texan hat. Which looked a little bit ridiculous. He was a very, very tiny man, and the two things just didn't go together, but he was intelligent enough to be humble about it and laugh at himself. You see him in the picture saying, it's like saying, I know I look a little bit stupid, but okay, so they asked me to put this Texan hat on, and he was sort of looking down, and okay, so you went along with it. But the what he came to arrange with the United States and the multinationals was that what he basically said to them was, look, I have all this, at the time it was 1 billion people, it's 2 billion now, but at the time, look, I have all these people. The economy of China was that of Haiti, basically. That is where China was. Nowhere, okay? Peasants, very backward in terms of industrialization and everything. There was absolutely nothing there. Okay, he had to do something about that, and he said, look, what we can offer you is a cheap labor force. Now, would that be um, good for you? Do you think that this is something that, yes, of course, the transnationals, therefore, began to, because of this cheap labor, began to move all their companies and factories and so on to China. We all know that, yes, on a massive scale, though, on a massive scale. It was almost overnight. And that gave them cheap labor costs, obviously, okay, and no holidays paid and no, maternity leave and all those things, okay, much, much cheaper. They could create the same product anyway after the labor force was trained, and it would also give them access to many other markets. Okay, so it was a win for the corporations. It was a win-win for China too. So for both of them. What it meant, however, was a little bit of a disaster for the West, for those countries, that little by little they saw their manufacturing leaving, factories closing. They didn't know exactly what was happening. No one really told them straight, no, we can get cheaper things. It was all done. And people, an experienced electrician would be left all of a sudden after 20 years with no job through no fault of his own. And okay, so the factory says that it's not making a profit and they have to move. Okay, so what do you do now in your 50s? Oh, well, you can train as a computer programmer. Well, it's not as easy as that, not on that massive scale. So the manufacturing industry in these Western countries, USA and Britain, actually just went off to China, basically. And this is the beginning of globalization, because then in the 90s, at the same time, the multinationals became transnationals. Yes, with no regulations above the nation state, the financing always above the nation state, and needless to say, this transfer was carried out by our leaders towards other countries, and this was beneficial to those other countries, but they were tremendously damaging for our countries. Not only in the economics of it, but that has consequences, and so in the political, in the cultural, in society as a whole. At the time, the argument was, oh, well, look, we can export all these industries there, the industries with little value, things that anyone can make anywhere in any country, manufacturing. And we'll keep for ourselves the important stuff, research and development, and moved into what is called now service economics. But the thing is, as we see now, that this does not work like that. In other words, research and development is usually done, ultimately, is always done where the manufacturing and the production takes place. Yes, and we from the 70s, we have seen that these the China certainly not only got all that manufacturing, but then started to do is research and development and so on. And they do whatever they have to do. And if they have to go to the Western spy, whatever. But the main thing is that all that the the West got industrialized, and at the beginning the beneficiaries were the corporations in China, and now we see that perhaps it's China alone, because they managed this very, very well, the Chinese. This was managed, I will say it again, this was managed extraordinarily well by China to become industrialized. I was listening to a historian who went there. He's just returned, spent about 2 weeks in China. He travels there quite regularly. And this was a conference and something that was organized, yes, by the Chinese Communist Party, but nevertheless, quite a number of people, intellectuals and so on, who were invited there. And they were shown around, and of course immediately you say, well, they're going to show them the, well, you know, what is the beautiful, everything is beautiful here and nothing of the, okay, all right. But one of the things he says, that when you, for those of us, I haven't been to China, so for those of us who have never been, he says that you have to change the chip in your brain when you go there. Everything is huge. Everything is just compared to Europe is just totally different. It's not only huge, but it's the speed at which things are done in China. So if they have to you know, construct a highway, a motorway, they can do that in a month. I remember when I was still teaching, one of the professors at Harvard talking about this. He was specifically talking about the Belt and Road Initiative, but I don't remember the name, and I don't remember the name of the bridge in New York or Cambridge, whatever it was. But he said that they construct. This was back in 2014 or something like that, and he was showing a bridge and a highway being constructed. He said, how long, he asked the students, how long do you think this took? Because the video was running, you know, fast, very fast, you know, so from the very beginning to the very end. And he asked them, how long do you think this took? And people said, knowing that they do things very fast, they would say a year, or, you know, 9 months or whatever. 5 years, 2 months. He said, here in our town, we have a bridge that needs to be rebuilt or reconstructed or done something because it's dangerous. It took like 3 or 4 years to get it approved. It took something, another 2 years, and it's still there. It's still, it hasn't, nothing has been done yet. So this historian I'm talking about is talking about the same thing, how fast things are done. But the most important thing is how quickly they manage this change. Remember what I said before, that in the 1970s, China had the economy of Haiti. Along with that, you have, you know, 1 billion, now 2 billion peasants. I don't know how well educated at the time, but it was a completely different world. And since the 90s, and especially since they became part of the World Trade Organization in 2002. In this, let's say 20, 30 years, they manage not only to rebuild this company in such a short time, but the population actually learned too. And I'll give you a few examples of what he says. I took note of them. Um, um, let me find it here. Yes, he's remarking about the high speed at which things are done. And not only done at the high speed that people are adapting to this new world that they are creating. From peasants in one generation to these highly educated, technology savvy people. And he says, I think it's that they're willing to learn. If something doesn't work, they try it. It doesn't work. And so they say, okay, this doesn't work. We'll have to do it in a different way. And that doesn't carry any kind of bad feeling. No, this didn't work. So we'll have to try another work. And they're willing to. And he says that from when he started going there, the change is obvious on how, for example, they treat foreigners or, customer service. They're used to foreigners now. Before, they used to go and look at you. No, it's like a very, he's been in many cities, not just Beijing, and the most important ones. He says, no, people are now used to it. And the customer service is superb. The treating with foreigners is superb, although sometimes he says you feel the way they act. For example, with the new money or the new technologies, I think I felt sometimes as if they were seeing me as a kind of a dinosaur. Another thing that I was surprised about is that the police do not carry arms. They don't carry weapons. And immediately, you think, well, oh yes, but they're surveilled everywhere. They don't. Okay, but the police do not carry weapons. Okay. Practically no crime at all. You're totally, totally safe in the streets. Oh, that is because they have cameras. Okay. And you can walk along the streets without being worried or being robbed or, all right. And yes, then he gave the example of how, well, the high-speed trains everywhere, 350 kilometers an hour. To get on our train here is just, it's just not the same. In other words, you have to change your view of the world. He says when he says there is a pilot test about in a high-speed train about an hour from Beijing, and they are constructed, is practically finished, a city. He says there was absolutely nothing there before, nothing at all, just open fields. Okay, as a pilot test, they are constructing this city there. As I said, sort of an hour in high-speed train from Beijing, and what they're trying to do is to decentralize Beijing, to have little by little, to have Beijing as the political capital and so on. The things that are not absolutely essential that are in the city, they are moving them, they're going to move them to other areas. So for example, more universities, they don't all have to be there in the center of Beijing. Universities, labs, financial services, research and development, all that away from, and begin to remain more the political administrative capital. And he says the construction is obviously an artificial city, but when you have 2 billion people, you have to think of things to do. Okay, they hope that if everything works well, this new city is going to be inhabited by about 5 million people, which to them is not very big. But instead of having a city center, a historic, well, obviously they cannot have a historic city center because it's just been built, but is in it's like, for example, the horror of Los Angeles, that you don't have a center, you just have this, but they do it in such, that is what they're doing. They're doing it in such a way that in each district of the city is like a mini city. Okay, so in other words, to avoid everyone going to the center of the city. So you have the city, but it's comprised of many different little cities, okay, and all with their university and their shops and their everything, okay. No one prohibits them from going to the center, but it's just a way of planning. He was very impressed by the city planning. He says they've also given up on constructing these horrid buildings that, well, even us in Europe actually in the 60s built these, blocks of flats, 30 floors up and so on. Well, they had to do it during the Cultural Revolution and during the first years of then they are being the chairman of the Communist Party, but that has ended actually. He says if you look at the construction, the architecture, you are really surprised. Some of them is with this new architecture that they're building is really beautiful. He says it's nothing to do with those horrid, blocks of flats everywhere. And also a lot of green spaces in this city, and parks and, the commons and so on. They have taken that into account too. And they show it to them because they said this is a new pilot study, see if it works and so on. And if it works, they will do it somewhere else. He says that they were taken to a place where it was how would you say, a pharmaceutical sort of production, a place where they made prostheses. And he said, now, for example, he says, I don't know whether I'm behind in my knowledge of this. He probably is. But when you broke a leg, in the old days, you had to have a cast there. And, it's no longer like that, right? Because one of my daughters actually broke her ankle once. And what they do is no longer that old-fashioned cast that you couldn't move. It's a boot that they have. And, okay. But he said, but beyond that, he said, imagine if you break your wrist, for example, you go there, okay, and with a scanner, they don't touch you at all. With the scanner, they just go around and scan the whole thing, and then they print it in a 3D laser printer or something like that. Anyway, he said, they feed it into this printer, and then in 10 minutes flat, in 10 minutes, you have the exact prosthesis that you need. Then you can, he said, and it took 10 minutes. He said, I was surprised. I don't know whether this is happening in other countries, but I have never seen it. Not in 10 minutes, not this level of high technology used like that. So he was actually quite impressed. Okay, so he was felt with the feeling that when you go there, it seems as if they are already in the beginning of the 22nd century, all the things that you see. They are in a different planet, in a different world. Whereas us, he says, when you come back to Europe, you feel as if you are at the beginning of the 20th, moving on to the 19th. But what I want to say with this is that when NATO now and the United States are all there in Washington D.C. saying about Russia, about China, this and China, they I suppose the politicians are listening and say, "What these people are? They're moving on. They are in a different world." Anyway, my conclusion, because otherwise this is, oh my goodness, I've been talking for about 50 minutes. It is not a question of East and West now. It is not a question to me of the global South versus the global North or the collective West. It is a question, I have said this so many times, it is a question of those who rule the world and those who are beginning to see that perhaps those who rule the world do not rule for the people's interest, and perhaps they feel a little bit played. They feel as if they've been had. So people in the West are not building barricades or taking anyone to the guillotine. But the fear is there that if they get to see more than they are supposed to see, there could be demonstrations and a lot of unhappiness being expressed in the streets, and this has to be prevented because otherwise they will lose the West too, and this has to be prevented at whatever cost. They lost the rest of the world to the idea of a global hegemony, a global unipolar dominion, because Russia rebelled, and then China rebelled, and Iran, and increasingly more and more countries are rebelling against this, against the West or the US or whoever it is dominating the whole world. So now they have to ensure that they don't lose the West too, with people protesting or voting them or their representatives out of power. And so, therefore, hence their resistance. They will avoid this situation, whatever it takes, of the West, the Western peoples coming to the fore and taking power. As I said, we the people are not the priority by any means. And if they need to get us into wars, or if they need to, whatever it might be, in order to avoid losing the West, they will. They make their decisions, I repeat, according to what is important and beneficial to them. We are not important. We, the people in the West, are as important to them as the poor Ukrainians are. And if and when their interests are threatened, economic, political, they will do whatever it takes. On a personal level, there might be little we can do. We can vote every 5 years. We can choose between this and that candidate. Actually, not choose, opt opt for this one or that one candidate, which have already, in any case, been pre-approved by them. Don't forget that. But we're beginning to see a certain movement here. For example, in Slovakia, which is a leftist, traditional leftist, social democratic party. We see it obviously in Hungary, which is on the right, you would say, Christian Democrat Party. Okay, but as we said so many times, it's no longer a question of right or left. It's about globalist or unipolar or hegemony and sovereignty of each individual country. And this is where the battle is. So it is clear that the global south, so-called, is against this hegemony, and therefore they're queuing and waiting in line to be part of this new other bloc that is being formed in order to fight a one-nation hegemony. But my conclusion is that they are not alone in this battle. In the West, we have the same problem, albeit expressed in different ways. But we have to find a way, those of us who agree with this, that to take back our sovereignty, and in other words, not to, for politics, the politics of your country and where your country is headed and so on, and the culture and everything, not to be subjugated to economic interests of an elite, of an globalist or transnational elite. In other words, their economic, their financial, their profits, their power is what is important, and our politics are subject to that. I don't know whether you agree with this, but in China it's the opposite. In China, yes, okay, terrible communist party, dictatorship and so on, but I just want you to take into account this point, that politics and geopolitics and culture and so on, whether you agree or disagree with it, that takes priority over the economic interests of the companies. In other words, they even tell them, yes, there is a certain amount, a great amount of private property and private profit and so on, but always, as long as it goes along with the same interests of the nation, if you get a little bit out of hand and all that is important is your profit, even if it goes against the interest of the nation, okay. And you see, what we have in the West, certainly in America, what they have is, for example, the weapons and armaments companies are private companies, and they produce whatever they want, as it were. And if they want to produce this, they go to Congress and say, look, we should produce this, and but they're not thinking of the interest, political, geopolitical, the benefit to the people of the United States. In other words, it's a question. I suppose that there is a gray sort of middle ground where, not the two extremes, but in the West, our politicians, our politics, and our culture are subjugated to the profits of the transnational elite. In China, those same people are subjugated to the geopolitical, political, cultural, and so on of the nation. I suppose that there is something in between, but I'm sure there is. I'm sure we had it until, let's say, until the 70s, when everything began to change. Certainly before the 90s, we had a sort of thing like that. we moved away from it. Perhaps we need to recover it. And that's it. Oh my goodness, an hour exactly. Okay, thank you for listening. Bye bye.